"You're the cutest girl in the room, right?" David laughed as he spoke to Emma. "I can't believe how he's treating me right in front of me. It's like a joke." Then Emma looked at me and burst out laughing. "What, your wife's ugly? I'm not going to put up with this anymore. I'm calling off the wedding," I told David straight up. "My name is Hazel Smith. I'll be 29 this year. I've always loved numbers, and now I work in administration. I think this job suits me because I'm a serious person at heart. Right now, I'm studying hard for a qualification. My fiancé's name is David. I met David at a singles party. I've never been in a relationship with a man before. I lacked confidence and couldn't talk to men. Then, as my friends started getting married, I felt rushed and started going to singles parties. And then, as I got more comfortable with the singles parties, I met David. My first impression of David was that he was handsome and refreshing. We had a great time talking at the party. David works for a major pharmaceutical company and is my age. He's got a great education, too. Despite that, he's down to earth and always brings up fun topics. He seems so experienced with women that at first I mistook him for a player. But ultimately, David and I became a couple. I was shocked that I could be with David. I couldn't believe that someone as amazing as him chose me. I must have used up all my luck and love when we became a couple. David smiled at me and said, "I'm so glad you chose me." I'm a lucky guy. I was the one who got chosen, so I asked him, "I'm really happy too, but why did you choose me?" I was worried if I was good enough for someone as great as David, but he just smiled and said, "I like girls who aren't experienced with men, someone pure. That's why you're my ideal." Then I'm glad. "Looking forward to being with you," I smiled back at him. David started asking me out regularly, and on our third date, he confessed, and we started dating. 6 months later, he proposed. I loved David, so I said yes right away. "Great, let's be happy together," David said that with a laugh. After living for 29 years, I had finally found happiness. Marriage would bring even more joy, I believed. But my hopes were quickly shattered because David changed after we got engaged and started living together. When we were dating, he always said, "Hazel, you're so cute, my princess," with a smile. But now those days are gone. Lately, he's always belittling me. For instance, the day after we moved in together, I got up earlier than David to make breakfast. I planned to do my makeup before leaving for work, so I was cooking without it. When breakfast was ready and I set the table, David woke up. I greeted him with a smile. "David, good morning. Breakfast's ready. Let's eat together." But David looked at me shocked. "What an awful face you have, a woman not wearing makeup in the morning. Try to look at least a bit presentable," David yelled and scowled as if he saw something disgusting. I retorted in a panic, "I was going to do my makeup later." "Isn't that too harsh to say? You used to call me cute." I was shocked by David's words, but he just smirked and added insult to injury. "That was just flattery to marry you." Honestly, any woman with a decent income who'd obey me was good enough. David said this with a sneer. I was so shocked that I dropped my fork. I doubted if I should marry David, but we had already paid a down payment for the wedding venue. And if I let David go, there was no guarantee I'd find another partner. I had no prospects before meeting David. I clung to the slim hope that maybe David would return to his kind self and endured his harsh words. David's comments and behavior became more outrageous. The worst was about the living expenses. He stopped contributing to the half we used to share. "Could you please contribute to the living expenses? It's hard for me to cover everything with my salary alone," I pleaded with him on a day off. But David, almost in disbelief, replied, "The wedding's going to cost us a fortune." I'm broke because of that expense, so you should cover the living expenses instead. However, David wasn't solely responsible for the wedding expenses. There would be gifts, and his share of the burden was much less. Despite my attempts to convince him, David wouldn't listen. Moreover, while he brought up the wedding expenses, he didn't help at all with the preparations. When I consulted him about the dress fittings, he said, "Dresses are a woman's thing, right?" "I don't care, Hazel, just decide on your own." David also had issues with his friends. He seemed to have many friends, as his phone was constantly ringing. Often the calls were from women I didn't know. When I suspected infidelity and asked David, he dismissed it, saying, "They're just friends." Jealousy is unattractive, so I couldn't press any further. But one day I heard something unbelievable. It happened one night when I woke up thirsty. David and I usually slept together in the bedroom, but he wasn't there. I heard voices in the living room. David was on the phone. "David," I went to open the living room door, but froze at his words. Our apartment walls are thin, so conversations are usually audible. "I wish I had married Emma," David said, laughing. It seemed he had the phone on speaker because I could hear Emma's voice too well. "You're going to quit your job someday, right?" "I want someone who can support me," Emma said and laughed. Her voice was annoying to listen to, obviously flirting and seeing David as a man. But David seemed unbothered and continued the call. "Being with Emma was really great. You're so cute. How about we start dating again?" Emma laughed at his suggestion. "Wouldn't that be sad for your fans?" "But I'm definitely cuter," she laughed. "Haha." David kept badmouthing me nonchalantly. I shed a tear at his cruel words, trying not to be heard in the next room. I whispered, "David doesn't really love me." "I thought we could be happy." I sobbed quietly so David wouldn't know I was awake. Unaware of my tears, David and Emma continued their sweet talk. Hearing their conversation was like hell for me. Why did I rush into marriage? I muttered, crying. David was definitely cheating, and there was no way he would return to the kind person he once was. But our wedding was just a week away. What should I do? I was in despair about the future. Then came the wedding day. David and I were getting ready in the dressing room. Our families had already entered the venue, so we were alone. We were just waiting for the attendants to arrive when there was a knock on the door. "Come in, please." Thinking it was the attendant, I encouraged the person to come in. However, it wasn't the attendant who entered the dressing room, but a woman in a pink dress. "Excuse me," I froze at that familiar voice. It was David's phone companion from that night. I just knew it. As I stood in shock, David cheerfully said, "Oh, Emma, you made it here without getting lost." He said that and patted Emma's head. Huh. Confused by David's words and actions, Emma looked at David and said with a pleased smile, "You gave me the room number, but this woman, she's your fiancé." Emma glanced at me and snickered. "Ah, yes, she is. Such a plain dress. She's supposed to be the star today, but she looks like an extra." Emma critically scanned my dress from top to bottom. Annoyed by her brazen words, I said sternly, "This is the dressing room, and the attendant will be here soon. So could you please leave now?" Emma quickly hid behind David. "No way." "Is she jealous? She's glaring at me, and it's really scary." "David, help me, Hazel." Jealousy is unattractive. "Emma is important to me, so don't be mean," David scolded me. David couldn't see from his position, but Emma smirked triumphantly at me. Her flashy makeup, perfectly styled hair, she must be about the same age as me. Emma looked at me with a victorious expression and said, "You really should have married me. You'll get bored of such a plain girl in 3 days, right?" Emma laughed heartily. "Indeed." I wouldn't choose such a woman if she didn't have a decent income. She's not my type, David said, looking down on me. I remained silent intentionally. I thought to let David and her talk as they pleased for a bit longer. I clenched the hem of my dress tightly. I really wanted to marry you even if we can't be a real married couple. In my heart, you're the only one for me. Oh, David, even after marriage, we'll always be together. Such an ugly girl. She's just for the money, Emma said, sparkling with laughter. Right, we'll always be together. I'll quit my job and live off Hazel's money with you. David made an outrageous suggestion. At this point, I was about to explode with anger. What do they think I am? But neither David nor Emma noticed my anger. David, you're so mean to your wife. Are you suggesting that because I'm cuter? Emma asked David with puppy eyes. David nodded as if it were obvious. You're the cutest girl in the room, right, Emma? What do you think about Hazel's face? David asked Emma, grinning from ear to ear. They treated me like this right in front of me. It seemed like a complete joke. Then Emma looked at me and burst out laughing. Oh, your wife's ugly, Emma said. Then she continued, marrying such an ugly woman, David's got it rough. I'll be his emotional wife and comfort him. Emma said this with a condescending laugh. Right, that's true. David laughed uproariously. I couldn't stand it anymore. I'm calling off the wedding, I said to David. David, not taking me seriously, laughed. If you call off the wedding now, you'll be single forever, you know, because you're so hopelessly ugly. Emma, too, was holding her stomach, laughing hysterically. David, you're too honest. I'm laughing so hard it hurts. After his burst of laughter, David said, you should be thankful you're even getting married to someone like me. You'll be funding my life forever. Anger boiled up inside me. I was furious at myself for not realizing what kind of person he was before getting married. I clenched my fists. Emma, still laughing, said, it's about to start, right? I need to eat my share of the wedding feast, so I'll head to the venue first, and left the room. Shortly after, the attendants arrived. It seemed like they hadn't heard any of the conversation in the dressing room as they briskly prepared us for the wedding, offering congratulations. They began explaining the wedding ceremony. David and I had chosen a restaurant wedding, so it would start directly with the reception. According to the attendants, we just had to follow the MC's instructions. I listened quietly to their explanation. David, oblivious, cheerfully said to me, once the wedding's over and we're registered, we'll be husband and wife. Your appearance is disappointing, but I'll put up with it. Emma's there anyway. I ignored David's remark. I had no intention of listening to him anymore. I was done with this man. David kept saying, hey, respond, but I remained unresponsive. All that was left was to get my revenge and make David and his crew regret everything. I was fueled by a sense of mission. Then David and I entered the wedding venue. The unaware attendees applauded generously. Of course, Emma was among them, smirking nastily. We took our seats, and the MC began the proceedings. Let's begin with the vows. We'll have both the bride and groom pledge their love. First, let's hear from the groom. Amidst thunderous applause, David said, I'm delighted to marry Hazel. I swear to love only Hazel for the rest of my life. David looked at me smugly. All lies. Internally, I was looking at David with cold indifference. As the applause continued, the MC continued, Thank you. Now the bride, Hazel, please respond. I ignored the MC and remained silent. The hall started to murmur. My parents and friends looked at me worriedly. Hazel, please, your response, the MC said, trying to keep the proceedings going despite the confusion. Still, I remained silent. The murmuring crowd stared at me with concern. Then, growing impatient, David snapped, "Hazel, why are you silent? Just say something already," in a harsh tone. But I stayed quiet. The atmosphere in the hall was unmistakably tense. My in-laws looked at me with puzzled expressions. It was time I had everyone's attention. I thought to myself and began to speak. Glancing sideways, I saw David, who seemed relieved that I was finally going to speak. I checked David's face and smirked. For a moment, it was too early for him to be relieved. Then I started speaking. "I will not vow to love David. I'm breaking up with him right now." As David stood there dumbfounded, I discreetly played the voice recorder at maximum volume. David and Emma's conversation filled the room. "I really wanted to marry you, even if we can't be a real married couple. You're the only one in my heart. Oh, David, even after marriage, we'll always be together. That ugly girl is just for the money." The recording of their earlier conversation in the dressing room played throughout the hall. I had been frustrated before for not having evidence of David's infidelity during his late-night calls with Emma, so I bought a voice recorder and always carried it with me. Today I had it in the dressing room and managed to record their conversation. The crowd grew even more restless. My friends glared at David with incredulous looks. My father looked like he was about to stand up and punch David any moment, held back only by my mother's desperate efforts. My mother-in-law seemed about to faint, while my father-in-law was frantically supporting her. Emma, who had been sitting with her friends at a table, was being glared at by those at the same table. She was sweating profusely, visibly uncomfortable. Meanwhile, the recording kept playing. In this tumultuous situation, David shouted in confusion, "Hazel, what are you doing? Stop that voice recorder right now." He tried to take the recorder from me, but I deftly avoided him. Then I shouted loudly, "No way. Everyone needs to know about your cheating with Emma over there." I glared at David, unable to take it anymore. Emma also yelled from her table, "You're so sneaky. Just because you get to be David's wife doesn't mean you're important. The one who really matters to David is cute little me." However, Emma's outburst only made the hall buzz with a different kind of turmoil. Everyone, regardless of age or gender, was murmuring and whispering. In this situation, Emma started to get flustered. "What's with everyone? What's going on?" I calmly told Emma, "Emma, it might seem like I'm pouring cold water on your confidence, but I think you're the ugliest person in this room." Someone burst out laughing at that. Emma's face turned bright red. "Huh. What are you talking about?" David said. "I'm the cutest. Are you blind or something?" She snapped back at me. Then scornful laughter started to leak from the crowd. Emma and David began to look puzzled. Suddenly, one of David's friends burst into laughter and yelled, "David, your taste in women is terrible. Liking a girl with a face like a panda, and she's built like one too." The whole room erupted in laughter at his comment. "What? How rude are you?" Emma yelled at David's friend, but her voice was drowned out by the laughter. Yes, Emma did look like a panda. Her makeup heavily outlined her eyes, and her small eyes indeed made her resemble a panda. Plus, her plump figure strained against her pink dress, her arms jiggling with every movement. I was worried her pink dress might burst at any moment. When I first saw Emma in the dressing room, I thought David's taste was peculiar. No wonder he called me ugly. I took the microphone from the MC. Emma called me ugly in the dressing room, but I wasn't upset at all. After all, Emma looks like a panda, and it's amusing to be insulted by a zoo animal, I spoke firmly. Chuckles erupted around the room. Emma's face was flushed with frustration. AARG. This is so annoying. She stamped her feet in anger. David was glaring at me fiercely. I sighed heavily, looking at the two of them. Cheaters like you have no right to glare at me, I struck by the truth. David and Emma fell silent. Then I addressed them. I'll make sure you two pay a hefty compensation for breaking off the engagement. As soon as they heard about compensation, David and Emma snapped back. Why should we pay anything when we're not even legally married? I'm not paying a dime. Me neither. I'm a freelancer. I don't have that kind of money, Emma shouted defiantly. The crowd was taken aback by their words, some even smiling wryly at their audacity. Amidst this, a person stood up and approached us. David, will you ever behave? David's boss, his face red with anger, yelled. Boss, this is David, with a confused expression, tried to make an excuse to his boss, but he couldn't come up with a good one and just mumbled. The boss sighed heavily at David's behavior. What an irreparable thing you've done, David. Openly cheating in front of Hazel. Maybe it's my fault for not educating you better, the boss said, holding his head, his face turning pale. He seemed to be trembling slightly. Emma, watching the boss's reaction, looked puzzled. Isn't that girl from a different company than David? Why is David's boss so worried about it? She asked, tilting her head. Sensing something off about the boss's reaction, David asked, Boss, what's wrong? It's not like my broken engagement with Hazel has anything to do with you, right? He asked nonchalantly. Then the boss, face red with anger, shouted, Don't you know who's on our company's board? Don't you recognize Hazel's father? The boss was yelling desperately. David, I muttered, I'm on the board of your company. We'll discuss your future at the next board meeting. David was shocked. He tried to appease my father in a panic. Wait, it's too much to go this far over what happened today. David's friends were also surprised. They were all his company friends, confused by this turn of events. It's not usual to find out the bride's father is a director at your company. Then my father said calmly, You plan to quit your job and live off my daughter, right? She just played that recording. If you're so eager to leave our company, why don't you resign right now? David's face filled with despair, and at my father's words, my mother-in-law fainted. My father-in-law was frantically calling her name. She must have been proud of her son graduating from a prestigious university and working at a major company. Probably on an elite path. But now his future looked bleak. I had only met my in-laws once, but they seemed like very nice and sensible people. That's why this incident must be so hard for my mother-in-law to accept. David seemed utterly bewildered that his mother had fainted. Then, unbelievably, he started yelling at me. If your father is a director at our company, you should have told me beforehand. Then I would have treated you better. David kept blaming me relentlessly, and he completely ignored his own faults. I lost my patience. David still blaming me even in this situation, I thought to myself that I didn't care what happened to him anymore. I asked him with a smile, Treat me better. Like how? Did you ever contribute even a little to our living expenses during our cohabitation? Or do you mean you didn't contribute financially but also didn't interfere with the household chores? Well, that's... David suddenly stumbled over his words. I exposed to everyone how David didn't contribute to the living expenses and yet had the audacity to criticize my housekeeping. Now he was being looked at even more disapprovingly by everyone around, especially the women, who no longer saw him as a person. Even a weed would be better. Emma, too, said, David, you didn't contribute a single penny to the living expenses. Isn't that a bit too stingy? David's face turned even paler, realizing the gravity of the situation. I smiled at David. That's great, David. You wanted to quit your job, right? Now you'll probably be able to leave it very soon." David glanced around, my father glaring at David furiously, friends looking at him with eyes full of condemnation, Emma slightly taken aback. There was not a single person on David's side. Under normal circumstances, this would be unbearable. Then David began to tremble and clung to me. "Hazel, I was wrong. I apologize. Please don't break off our engagement. I don't want to leave my job." He truly apologized with cold sweat on his forehead. But his apology was too late. I looked at David with a cold gaze. "It's over, David. After being looked down upon like this, things can't go back to how they were. Enough is enough." But David looked like he was about to cry. I delivered the final blow. "David, planning to be unemployed, and Emma, a freelancer, you two are a perfect match." Emma turned pale too. If she ended up with an unemployed David, it would be a disaster for both of them. That would probably be a problem for Emma too. She quickly distanced herself from David, and then David, as if all strength had left him, collapsed to his knees. "Well, don't ever show up in front of me again," I said, and left the venue in my wedding dress. Eventually, David left the company. The company's decision was a demotion to a department where he would mostly be organizing documents. However, many company associates witnessed David's disgrace at the wedding, including my father, who was a board director. Smart people started avoiding David, and it seemed everyone was secretly criticizing him. This made David's life at the company unbearable. Unable to withstand it, he submitted his resignation before the transfer. But leaving the company brought David another challenge: the compensation for breaking off the engagement. The compensation for breaking an engagement is usually around the market rate, so it was not an excessive amount. However, this time the compensation included the wedding expenses as well. Since the wedding turned into such a fiasco, we're returning the gifts to all the guests, but as the food was served, the full cost of the wedding is still incurred. It was decided that David would bear these costs as his responsibility for ruining the wedding. David's parents, who were very nice people, apologized to me several times. I almost felt bad for them. David doesn't have any savings. He's extravagant with money and spends as much as he has, which is why his parents had to temporarily bear the cost of the compensation. During the discussion, David stubbornly argued, "If I marry you, I don't have to pay, right? Then I'll register the marriage." I only felt contempt for David. He was severely reprimanded by his father-in-law. Eventually, his father, infuriated, declared, "You're disowned. I don't want to know you anymore." David was visibly panicked. Having quit his job and now without a home, he was in a dire situation. Naturally, the apartment where we lived together was already in the process of being vacated. I believe he had to leave by the end of this month. I had already arranged movers, sent my belongings to my parents' house, and left the apartment. Later on, I learned that David ignored the landlord's repeated demands to vacate and was eventually sued. I found out when the landlord contacted me for advice. Apparently, David had stayed there for about 3 months without paying rent. He was eventually forcibly evicted through legal proceedings. There was no way for David to return to his now disowned family without a job or a home. David's future looked bleak. I think he's fallen as far as he can go. David and Emma didn't reconcile afterward. I filed for compensation through a lawyer from Emma. The condition was that the amount would be reduced if they didn't reconcile. Emma quickly chose not to reconcile with David. "I'm not interested in someone without money or a home," Emma declared firmly. Apparently, David reached out to her several times asking for help, but she ignored all his attempts. Emma apologized to me. "I'm truly sorry. Since that wedding, everyone has been calling me Panda, and it's been very hard. I think the guests from the wedding must have spread it around. It seems that experience was a wake-up call for Emma, and she began to reflect on her actions. However, she still faced criticism from those around her. She even left her part-time job because somehow the pandemic name got out there, and she was laughed at behind her back. "I'm thinking of moving far away," she said. Emma's thoughtless remarks about David led her to the point where she felt the need to flee. She'll likely spend a lot of time worrying about what others think of her. It's a fitting punishment for someone who looked down on others so much. She needs to learn her lesson. As for me, I passed my certification exam with flying colors. I'm now a certified labor consultant working in administration, dealing with payroll and employee onboarding and offboarding. I wanted to deepen my knowledge of labor issues. This will definitely help me dedicate myself more to my work. And not just in my career, but I've also taken a step forward in my love life. Actually, after that wedding, my friends started introducing me to men. I was grateful for their kindness, especially since I was done with matchmaking parties. There's one man I've gotten close to, introduced by a friend. He's 3 years older, a bit of a workaholic. He's not particularly handsome, rather plain-looking. He works in the office of a small to medium-sized business, nothing flashy. But after David, I have an aversion to good-looking, elite types. So this man feels like someone I can be myself with. It's still early days and I don't know where it might lead, but it's a step I